The rifle scope cut through the Afghan darkness like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Thea Blackwood held her breath, finger resting feather-light on the trigger of her M24 sniper rifle. 1,200 meters downrange, a figure moved across the compound courtyard, a shadow among shadows, barely distinguishable from the night itself. The wind whispered across the rocky outcrop where she lay prone, carrying with it the smell of dust and distant smoke. Her spotter, Corporal Danny Rivers, breathed steadily beside her, his presence marked only by the faint click of his rangefinder adjusting. Wind 2.3 meters per second, left to right, Rivers murmured. Target moving northwest, speed approximately 1 meter per second. Thea made the adjustment without conscious thought. 27 years old, 5'7", with copper-red hair pulled tight beneath her helmet, she looked more like a college professor than the deadliest sniper in Joint Special Operations Command. But appearances, as her instructors at Quantico had learned, meant nothing when you could put a bullet through a playing card at 1,000 meters. The target stopped. Thea's world narrowed to a pinpoint of absolute clarity. The gentle rise and fall of her chest, the steady thrum of her heartbeat, the crosshairs settling on center mass. Between one breath and the next, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 1,200 meters away, the insurgent dropped without a sound. Confirmed kill, Rivers said quietly. That's 7 tonight. Thea was already chambering another round, sweeping the scope across the compound. 3 more targets materialized from doorways, weapons raised, searching for the source of the shot. She took them methodically, one after another, each shot a perfect marriage of mathematics and instinct. 10 seconds, 3 kills. Jesus Christ, Rivers breathed. Blackwood, you're a goddamn ghost. She said nothing. Words felt unnecessary in these moments, almost profane. This was the only language that mattered out here, the language of breath and bullet, of calculated violence in service of something larger than herself. Down in the valley, the assault team moved through the compound like water through cracks. No resistance, no casualties. By the time the sun cracked the eastern horizon, 2 American journalists who'd been held captive for 17 days were on a helicopter back to Bagram Air Base, and Thea Blackwood had 10 confirmed kills to add to her record. The debriefing room at Bagram smelled of stale coffee and testosterone. Thea sat ramrod straight in her chair, still wearing her combat fatigues, dirt from the operation smudged across her cheekbones like war paint. Across the table, Captain Marcus Kane regarded her with the same expression he'd worn for the past 6 weeks, a mixture of grudging respect and fundamental disbelief that someone who looked like her could do what she did. Kane was SEAL Team 6, 35 years old, built like a middleweight boxer, with the kind of face that appeared on recruiting posters. He'd completed 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and had more confirmed kills than most snipers accumulated in entire careers. He also had very specific ideas about who belonged in combat. Lieutenant Blackwood, he said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Your performance tonight was acceptable. Acceptable. The word hung in the air like an insult disguised as praise. However, Kane continued, leaning back in his chair, you violated direct orders by advancing to the northern ridge. Your assigned position was on the southern approach. The southern approach had no line of sight on the target zone, Thea replied evenly. The intel packet showed guard towers on the north and east sides. From the southern position, I would have been shooting blind. The southern position was selected for your safety, Lieutenant. That northern ridge was within range of enemy mortars. Respectfully, sir, I wasn't hired for my safety. I was hired to make sure the assault team came home alive. Something flickered behind Kane's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or the particular frustration of a man who'd found his assumptions challenged by inconvenient reality. You're JSOC, Blackwood, not a Marine anymore. Out here, following orders isn't optional. It's the difference between mission success and body bags. 10 kills, 0 friendly casualties, Thea said quietly. I'd call that mission success, sir. The silence that followed was broken by Major Elena Cortez, the task force intelligence officer, who'd been watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement. She's got you there, Marcus, Cortez said, sliding a manila folder across the table. The journalists are already talking to CNN. State Department's calling it a flawless operation. You're going to have a hard time court-martialing someone who just made us all look like heroes. Kane's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, curtly. Dismiss, Lieutenant. Get some rest. We've got another op in 72 hours. Thea stood, saluted, and walked out of the room with her spine straight and her face expressionless. But her hands, tucked into her pockets, were shaking. Her quarters were a converted shipping container, 10 feet by 8 feet, furnished with a cot, a footlocker, and a single bare bulb that flickered whenever the generators cycled. Luxury accommodations by Afghan standards. She'd slept in worse. Thea stripped off her combat gear methodically, each movement automatic from years of repetition. Body armor onto the hook, rifle into the weapons locker, boots lined up precisely beside the cot. The ritual was soothing in its predictability, a small assertion of order in a world defined by chaos. She was down to her t-shirt and cargo pants when someone knocked on her door. It's open. Rivers stuck his head in, grinning. Thought you might want to know. Word spreading about tonight. Half the base is calling you Red Death. Thea grimaced. That's the dumbest call sign I've ever heard. Better than Princess, which is what Kane's guys were calling you last week. Rivers stepped inside, lowering his voice. Seriously though, Thea, that was incredible work tonight. I've been spotting for snipers for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone shoot like that. I had a good teacher. Yeah? Who? The question hung in the air. Thea turned away, reaching for her canteen, buying herself a moment to decide how much truth to tell. My father, she said finally. He taught me everything I know. Army? Delta Force. He died when I was 11. The lie came easily after 18 years of practice. Easier than the truth, which was that Thea didn't actually know whether Colonel Garrett Blackwood was dead or alive. Easier than explaining that for nearly 2 decades, she'd believed the official story. Training accident, helicopter crash in the Hindu Kush, remains never recovered. Until 3 days ago, when everything she thought she knew about her father had been torn apart by a single photograph. Rivers must have sensed something in her silence because he changed the subject. Listen, some of the guys are heading to the rec tent for poker. You in? Rain check. I need to write some emails. Fair enough. Get some sleep, Blackwood. You earned it. He left, and Thea was alone again with the flickering bulb in the photograph that had arrived in yesterday's mail call. A photograph that should not exist, that could not exist, but that she'd stared at for 6 hours straight, trying to convince herself it was fake. She pulled the photo from her footlocker now, handling it like an explosive device that might detonate at any moment. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed a man in civilian clothes, jeans, a weather jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, walking through what appeared to be a Middle Eastern market. The quality wasn't great, but Thea had memorized her father's face from 1,000 bedtime stories and breakfast table conversations. She knew the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, the particular angle of his jaw. The man in the photograph was Colonel Garrett Blackwood, and according to the date stamp in the corner, the photo had been taken in February 2015, 14 years after he'd supposedly died. Thea's hands trembled as she turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written 3 words in neat block capitals. Kandahar Protocol, Shepherd. Sleep didn't come. Thea lay on her cot, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling, while questions multiplied in her mind like bacteria in a petri dish. If her father was alive, why had he let everyone believe he was dead? Where had he been for 18 years? What the hell was the Kandahar Protocol? And who was Shepherd? At 0400 hours, she gave up on sleep and powered up her laptop. Bagram had spotty internet at the best of times, but the intelligence officers maintained a secure network with access to various classified databases. Thea had clearance through JSOC. She used it now, typing Kandahar Protocol into the search field. 0 results. She tried variations: Operation Kandahar, Kandahar Mission, Protocol Kandahar. Nothing. Either the Kandahar Protocol didn't exist in any official database, or it was buried so deep that even her top secret clearance couldn't touch it. Shepard, then. She ran that through every database she could access: CIA personnel files, military records, contractor registries. Hundreds of results, none of them obviously relevant. She spent 2 hours sorting through names, cross-referencing them with Afghanistan deployments, looking for any connection to her father. At 0617 hours, she found something. Frank Coleman, Staff Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces, deployed to Afghanistan 2001 through 2003. After leaving the military, Coleman had transitioned to the CIA, working as a field operative in Central Asia until his retirement in 2011. Last known address, Whitefish, Montana. What made Thea's pulse quicken wasn't the resume. It was the photograph attached to Coleman's service record, a group shot from 2002 showing a Special Forces A-team posed in front of a Chinook helicopter. There were 12 men in the photo, all in combat gear, all grinning with the particular cockiness of soldiers who just survived something dangerous. Third from the left stood Colonel Garrett Blackwood, and directly beside him, arms slung over Blackwood's shoulder, was Frank Coleman. The connection could have been coincidence. Lots of soldiers served together, but Thea's instincts, honed by countless hours in the field, where spotting patterns meant the difference between life and death, were screaming that this mattered. She pulled up Coleman's personnel file, looking for call signs. Special Forces loved their nicknames, and they tended to stick. Coleman had cycled through several over his career: Falcon, Desert Fox, and, Thea's breath caught, Shepard. Found you, she thought. Getting leave approved from an active JSOC deployment required either a family emergency or an act of Congress. Thea manufactured the former, claiming her mother had been hospitalized with a stroke. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her mother had suffered a minor stroke 2 years ago, though she'd recovered fully, but the deception still left a sour taste in Thea's mouth. Kane signed off on her emergency leave with obvious relief. 2 weeks, he said. After that, you're either back in theater or you're reassigned. Your call. Understood, sir. In Blackwood? Kane's expression softened fractionally. I hope your mother's okay. Thank you, sir. 36 hours later, Thea was on a C-17 cargo plane headed for Ramstein Air Base in Germany, then a civilian flight to Seattle, and finally a rental car driving north through Montana's spectacular emptiness toward a town called Whitefish. The landscape scrolled past her windows like a fever dream. Endless forests of lodgepole pine, mountains that clawed at the sky, rivers so clear you could count the stones on their beds. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. She'd grown up in Virginia, all red brick and gentle hills. This was different, wilder, lonelier. Frank Coleman lived 40 minutes outside Whitefish proper, down a dirt road that snaked through national forest land. Thea drove slowly, hyper-aware that she was entering unknown territory without backup, without a plan, armed with nothing but questions and a photograph that might be an elaborate hoax. The house appeared suddenly through the trees, a log cabin, well-maintained, with a covered porch and a stone chimney releasing a thin thread of smoke into the afternoon air. A Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, dusty but serviceable. Everything about the place screamed solitude and self-sufficiency. Thea parked her rental car and sat for a moment, gathering herself. Then she stepped out into the mountain air, which smelled of pine resin and approaching rain. She was halfway to the porch when the front door opened and a man emerged holding a shotgun. "That's far enough," he called out. His voice was rough, weathered by age and cigarettes. "This is private property. Turn around and head back the way you came." Thea stopped, keeping her hands visible. The man was in his mid-60s, lean and hard as whipcord, with silver hair cut military short and eyes that assessed her with the automatic competence of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating threats. "Mr. Coleman?" she said. "Frank Coleman?" "Depends on who's asking. My name is Thea Blackwood, Lieutenant, United States Marine Corps, currently attached to JSOC. I need to talk to you about my father." Coleman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or alarm. "Don't know anyone by that name. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff." "Colonel Garrett Blackwood," Thea continued, her voice steady despite the shotgun pointed at her chest. "Delta Force, supposedly killed in action in 2001. But we both know that's not true, don't we, Shepard?" The shotgun wavered fractionally. Coleman's jaw worked, grinding through some internal calculation. Finally, he lowered the weapon. "How did you find me?" "I'm very good at finding things," Thea said. "It's what they pay me for." Coleman studied her for a long moment, and Thea could feel him measuring her against some internal standard, comparing her to memories she couldn't see. Then he sighed, a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. "You look just like him," Coleman said quietly. "Same eyes, same stubborn jaw." "Christ, he told me you joined the Marines. Told me you were good, but I didn't believe." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You'd better come inside." The cabin's interior was exactly what Thea expected. Functional furniture, minimal decoration, walls lined with bookshelves holding volumes on military history and wilderness survival. A gun safe stood in one corner. Above the fireplace hung a faded photograph of a Special Forces team, the same image Thea had found in Coleman's personnel file. Coleman poured them both coffee from a battered percolator, then settled into an armchair that had clearly been his preferred seat for years. Thea remained standing, too wired to sit. "Start talking," she said. "What do you already know?" Thea pulled the photograph from her jacket and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I know this exists. I know it's dated 2015, and I know that for 18 years everyone told me my father died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan." Coleman picked up the photograph, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get this?" "It arrived in the mail 3 days ago. No return address, just the photo and 3 words on the back. Kandahar Protocol, Shepard." "Son of a bitch," Coleman muttered. "He said the insurance policy was too risky. I told him—" He stopped himself, setting the photo down carefully. "How much time do you have, Lieutenant?" "As much as it takes." Coleman nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of secrets held too long. "Your father didn't die in 2001, he said. He faked his death. Had to. It was the only way to stay alive long enough to do what needed doing." The words hit Thea like a physical blow, even though part of her had known they were coming. Hearing them spoken aloud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. "Why?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because in August 2001, 2 months before the helicopter crash that supposedly killed him, your father stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen, something that powerful people wanted buried. The Kandahar Protocol." "Yeah," Coleman's face hardened. "You want the official version or the truth?" "The truth. The truth is that some wars are fought for freedom and justice, and all the pretty things they tell you about in basic training. And some wars are fought because there's money to be made. Lots of money. The kind of money that makes men do unspeakable things." He stood, walked to the window, stared out at the darkening forest. "In 2001, before 9/11, before Afghanistan became a household name, the CIA was running operations in Central Asia, monitoring the Taliban, tracking Al-Qaeda, all legitimate intelligence work. But some people saw an opportunity. They knew war was coming. Everyone in the intelligence community knew. even if nobody wanted to admit it publicly, and they started making arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Thea asked, though cold dread was already spreading through her chest. The kind where you make sure a war lasts as long as possible, where you arm both sides, just enough to keep the fighting going, but never enough for anyone to win decisively. Where you control the mineral resources, the opium trade, the reconstruction contracts. The Kandahar Protocol wasn't just a plan, it was a blueprint for turning Afghanistan into a profit center that would run for decades. Thea felt sick. Who was behind it? That's what your father spent 18 years trying to find out. He uncovered pieces of it, names, bank accounts, weapons shipments that didn't appear in any official records. But every time he got close to the top of the pyramid, people started dying. Good people, operatives he trusted, even civilians who'd provided information. So he faked his death. We faked his death, Coleman corrected. I helped him set it up, arrange for a helicopter to go down in the Hindu Kush with just enough wreckage to be convincing, but not enough for DNA identification. Your father walked away from everything, his rank, his pension, his family, because it was the only way to protect you and your mother while he built a case. Built a case against who? Coleman turned from the window, and in the fading light, Thea could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Against some of the most powerful people in the United States military and intelligence establishment. People who could make problems disappear with a phone call. People who've been getting rich off American blood for 20 years. Names, Thea said flatly. Give me names. I can't. Because 18 months ago, your father stopped checking in. We had a protocol, coded messages, dead drops, the whole Cold War routine. And then, nothing. Radio silence. The words landed like hammer blows. You think he's dead. I think he's either dead or captured. And if it's the latter, he's in a very dark hole somewhere, being held by people who have every reason to keep him alive and talking, but no reason to ever let him go. Thea's mind was racing, processing information at combat speed, sorting through implications and options. The photograph, someone sent it to me. Why now? Because someone wants you to know the truth. Could be an ally of your father's, trying to recruit you. Could be one of his enemies, trying to draw you out so they can eliminate the last Blackwood who knows enough to be dangerous. I don't know anything. You know now, Coleman said grimly, which means you've got a target on your back whether you want one or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thea looked at the photograph on the coffee table, her father's face, frozen in a moment 14 years ago, walking through a market in some distant city. She thought about all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep at 11 years old, mourning a man who wasn't actually dead. She thought about her mother, who'd never remarried, who'd spent 18 years being faithful to a ghost. She thought about the 10 kills she'd made 3 nights ago, each one in service of the same system her father had died fighting against. And she made a decision. I'm going to find him, she said. I'm going to bring him home, and then we're going to burn the Kandahar Protocol to the ground. Coleman smiled, a sad, knowing expression that held no humor. You really are Garrett's daughter. Tell me everything you know, Thea said. Every name, every location, every piece of the puzzle. I've got 2 weeks of leave and nothing to lose. 2 weeks isn't enough time. Then I'll make it enough. They talked until dawn. Coleman spread out maps, showed her photographs, walked her through 18 years of investigation conducted in the shadows. By the time the sun rose over the Montana mountains, Thea had filled 2 notebooks with names and dates and connections, a spider's web of conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American power. And she had a plan. Thea returned to Afghanistan 5 days before her leave officially ended. She arrived at Bagram at 0300 hours, exhausted from 36 hours of travel, but vibrating with purpose. The base was quiet, most personnel sleeping through the hottest part of the night. She went directly to her quarters, dropped her duffel bag, and powered up her laptop. Coleman had given her access codes to several classified databases. Technically illegal, definitely court-martial worthy, but Thea was past caring about the niceties of proper channels. If her father's enemies were embedded in the system, then the system couldn't be trusted. She spent the next 6 hours digging through files, cross-referencing Coleman's information with deployment records and mission reports. Slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. Weapons shipments that arrived in Afghanistan but never made it to their intended recipients. Intelligence reports that had been altered or suppressed. Soldiers killed in firefights where the enemy had impossibly good information about American positions. And at the center of it all, like a black hole warping everything around it, was a name that appeared again and again in the documentation. General William Hawthorne. Hawthorne, Commander, International Security Assistance Force, Afghanistan. 4-star general with a chest full of medals and a reputation as a soldier's soldier. He'd been in country since 2017, overseeing operations across the entire Afghan theater. He'd also been a colonel in 2001, serving as a military liaison to the CIA when the Kandahar Protocol was conceived. Thea stared at Hawthorne's service photograph on her screen, a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that inspired confidence. He looked like everyone's image of what a general should be: dignified, competent, trustworthy. And if Coleman's information was accurate, he was one of the architects of a conspiracy that had resulted in thousands of American deaths and untold billions in illicit profits. She was still staring at the photograph when someone knocked on her door. "Come in." Captain Kane stepped inside, and Thea's hand automatically moved to close her laptop. But Kane's attention was elsewhere, focused on a manila folder in his hands. "Blackwood," he said. "How's your mother?" "Recovering, sir. Thank you for asking." "Good. Glad to hear it." Kane's expression shifted, became more formal. "I need to talk to you about something. It's sensitive." Thea's pulse accelerated, but she kept her face neutral. "Of course, sir." Kane sat down on her footlocker, which was the only seating option besides a cot. He looked uncomfortable, like a man about to confess something difficult. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I've been less than supportive since you joined this task force. Made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that shouldn't matter. Gender, primarily. That was wrong of me." Thea blinked, genuinely surprised. "Sir?" "You're the best sniper I've ever worked with," Kane continued. "Better than anyone I served with in the SEALs. And that's saying something. You've saved lives, completed impossible shots, and you've done it all while dealing with my bullshit skepticism. So I'm apologizing. And I'm asking if you'd be willing to talk about something that happened a long time ago. Something I've never told anyone else." He opened the manila folder, pulled out a photograph, and handed it to Thea. The image showed 2 men in desert camouflage, standing beside a Humvee in what appeared to be Syria or Iraq. One of the men was a much younger Marcus Kane. The other was Colonel Garrett Blackwood. Thea's hands shook as she held the photograph. She looked up at Kane, speechless. "I met your father in 2016, Kane said quietly. "I was on a black op in northern Syria, part of a joint task force hunting an ISIS cell. We got ambushed. Bad intel, or maybe deliberately bad intel. I never figured out which. Lost 3 men in the first 30 seconds. We were pinned down, taking fire from 3 directions, and I was certain we were all going to die in that God-forsaken desert." He paused, lost in memory. Then this guy appears out of nowhere. No unit identification, no backup, just a single operator with more weapons than seemed physically possible to carry. He dropped into our position, laid down covering fire, and got us out. Killed maybe a dozen hostiles, took 2 bullets himself, and never broke a sweat. Afterward, I asked him who he was. He said his name was Ghost, that he was a contractor doing freelance work for the agency. We drank whiskey in a safe house in Raqqa, and he told me stories. Never used real names, never gave specifics, but I got the impression he'd been operating in the shadows for a very long time. fighting a war that nobody else knew about. Kane met Thea's eyes. Before we parted ways, he made me promise something. He said if I ever met a Marine named Blackwood, specifically a female Marine with red hair and a gift for shooting, I should keep an eye on. Make sure she didn't get herself killed doing something heroic and stupid. He said, Kane's voice caught. He said she was the only thing in the world that still mattered to him. Tears burned in Thea's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to let them fall. I didn't make the connection until you showed up here, Kane continued. Same last name, but Blackwood's not that uncommon. Then I saw you shoot, and I knew. You move like him, think like him. You've got the same gift. Why are you telling me this now? Thea asked, her voice rough. Because 3 days ago, I received a message through a back channel I haven't used in years. The message contained coordinates to a location in eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border, and it contained your father's name, his real name, not the alias he used with me. Thea sat forward. What were the coordinates? That's the thing. They point to a location that officially doesn't exist, a black site that's not on any map, not in any database, the kind of place where people disappear. Kane pulled out another paper from his folder, handed it to Thea. Someone thinks your father is being held there, and someone wants us to know about it. Who sent the message? No idea, but here's where it gets interesting. I showed the coordinates to our intelligence officer, Major Cortez, without telling her what they were for. She ran them through her contacts at the CIA, and the next day, I received orders directly from General Hawthorne's office, telling me to forget about the coordinates, that the inquiry was closed, and that any further investigation would result in a court-martial. The room seemed to tilt. Hawthorne knows. Knows what? Thea made a decision. Trust had to start somewhere, and Kane had just handed her information that could end his career. She owed him the truth, or at least part of it. My father didn't die in 2001, she said. He's been operating undercover for 18 years, investigating a conspiracy inside the military and intelligence establishment. A conspiracy that General Hawthorne is part of. Kane's face went very still. That's a serious accusation, Lieutenant. I have evidence, documents, witnesses, connections that I can prove. And now I have coordinates to where my father might be held. Thea stood, began pacing in the tiny space. I need to get to that location. I need to confirm whether he's there, and if he is, I need to get him out. That's suicide. A black site will have security that makes Fort Knox look like a shopping mall. You'd need an entire team, air support, extraction vehicles, resources we don't have and can't requisition without alerting the very people we're trying to avoid. Then I'll go alone. Blackwood. My father has been fighting this war for 18 years without backup, without recognition, without anyone even knowing he's alive. I will not leave him in a hole because the mission is too dangerous. Kane was silent for a long moment. Then he said, if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right, which means you need a team. I can't ask anyone else to risk. You're not asking, I'm volunteering. Kane's expression hardened with determination. Your father saved my life. That creates a debt. And besides, if half of what you're suggesting is true, then we've been fighting on the wrong side of a corrupt war for 2 decades. That makes me angry, Lieutenant. And when I get angry, I do something about it. Kane, there's more. He pulled out his phone, opened an encrypted messaging app. After Hawthorne shut down my inquiry, I reached out to some people I trust, off-the-books operators, guys who've been in the game long enough to know where the bodies are buried. One of them came back with something interesting. He showed Thea the message on his screen. It was brief, just 3 sentences, but they made her blood run cold. Kandahar Protocol is real. Assets moving to secure black site location. If you're planning something, do it in the next 48 hours or not at all. Thea looked at Kane. Who sent this? An old friend, someone who knows things. Kane's jaw set. We've got a narrow window, Blackwood. After that, your father either gets moved somewhere even more secure, or they decide he's too much of a liability and eliminate him permanently. 48 hours, 2 days to plan an illegal extraction from a black site guarded by forces that answered to a 4-star general. 2 days to assemble a team, gather resources, and cross hundreds of miles of hostile territory. It should have been impossible. But Thea Blackwood had spent her entire life doing impossible things. "We're going to need help," she said, "more than just the two of us." "I might know some people," Kane replied. "Give me 6 hours." 6 hours, then we move. 6 hours later, Thea stood in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of Bagram Air Base, watching as 6 men filtered through the darkness like ghosts materializing from smoke. Kane had promised her a team. What he'd delivered was something else entirely, a collection of operators who existed in the spaces between official military doctrine and outright rebellion. The first man through the door was Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos, a combat medic who'd served 3 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment before transferring to JSOC. 42 years old, compact and muscular, with the kind of hands that could suture a wound or snap a neck with equal efficiency. He nodded once at Thea, his dark eyes assessing her with professional detachment. Behind him came Master Sergeant David Kowalski and Sergeant First Class Patrick O'Brien, both former Delta Force operators who'd worked with Kane in Iraq. Kowalski was tall and rangy, with a sniper's patience and a demolitions expert's love of controlled chaos. O'Brien was shorter, broader, built like a fire hydrant, specializing in close-quarters combat and breaching operations. They moved with the easy confidence of men who'd survived situations that killed lesser soldiers. The fourth man was Captain James Richardson, a helicopter pilot who'd flown Night Stalker missions for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of face that belonged in a college fraternity rather than a combat zone. But his eyes held the flat calm of someone who'd flown through hell and brought everyone home alive. The fifth man surprised Thea. Warrant Officer Devin Cross was a signals intelligence specialist, 40 years old, with the wiry build of a marathon runner and the perpetually alert expression of someone who'd spent too many years listening to enemy communications. He carried a tactical bag filled with electronic equipment that looked more at home in a hacker's basement than a combat zone. The last man to enter made Thea catch her breath. He was in his 60s, gray-haired and weathered, moving with the careful economy of someone whose body had absorbed decades of punishment. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, hiking boots, but everything about his bearing screamed military. Frank Coleman met her stare with a slight smile. "Told you I'd help however I could, Lieutenant. Didn't figure that would involve flying halfway across the world on 12 hours' notice, but here we are." "Mr. Coleman," Thea said carefully, aware of the others watching this exchange. "This is a combat operation. I can't ask a civilian." "You're not asking, I'm volunteering. And before you give me the speech about age and capability, remember that I was running operations in this country while you were in diapers." Coleman's expression hardened. "Garrett Blackwood is the best friend I ever had. If there's a chance he's alive, I'm going to be there when we bring him home. Non-negotiable." Kane stepped forward before Thea could respond. "Everyone, this is Lieutenant Thea Blackwood. For the next 48 hours, she's in operational command. What she says goes. No questions, no second guessing. Anyone have a problem with that?" The men exchanged glances. Santos spoke first, his voice carrying a faint Texas drawl. "Sir, with respect, most of us have been doing this longer than the lieutenant's been alive. Why exactly are we taking orders from—" "Because she's Garrett Blackwood's daughter," Kane interrupted. "And because she shoots better than anyone in this room, including me. That answer your question?" Santos's eyebrows rose. He looked at Thea with new interest. "Blackwood's kid? Damn. Heard stories about your old man. They said he could shoot the wings off a fly at 500 meters. Try 1,000, Coleman said quietly. and his daughters better. The statement hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Thea felt the weight of their attention, the way they were recalibrating their assessments, measuring her against the legend of her father. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the command authority she'd learned from 100 combat briefings. "We have 43 hours to plan and execute an extraction from a black site that officially doesn't exist, guarded by forces that will kill us on sight, located in terrain that's hostile in every possible way. I don't care if you think I'm qualified to lead this operation. I don't care if you trust me. All I care about is whether you can follow orders and get the job done. Can you do that?" Silence. Then O'Brien grinned, a fierce expression that transformed his blunt features. "Hell yeah, ma'am. Let's go get your dad." The others nodded in agreement. Whatever test Thea had just passed, she'd passed it. "All right," she said, moving to the large map spread across a makeshift table in the center of the warehouse. "Let's talk about how we're going to do the impossible." The next hours blurred together in a frenzy of planning. Thea laid out everything she knew: the coordinates Kane had received, Coleman's intelligence about the Kandahar Protocol, the evidence that General Hawthorne was involved. The team absorbed the information with the grim pragmatism of professionals who'd seen enough corruption to believe anything was possible. The black site was located in Paktika province, near the Pakistani border, in mountainous terrain that made conventional assault nearly impossible. Satellite imagery, obtained through channels Thea didn't ask about, showed a compound built into the side of a mountain. 3 buildings arranged in a defensive triangle, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Thermal scans indicated approximately 20 personnel on site, rotating in 12-hour shifts. "Standard CIA black site configuration," Coleman observed, studying the images. "I've seen a dozen facilities with this exact layout. The center building is administration and interrogation. East building is barracks for guards. West building is detention. That's where they'll be holding prisoners." "Access points?" Kane asked. "Limited. Main gate here, on the north side. Service entrance on the south, but it'll be locked down tight. The real vulnerability is overhead. They're not expecting air assault this deep in the mountains." Richardson leaned over the map, tracing potential flight paths. "I can get us in low and fast using a Black Hawk, but extraction's going to be a problem. Once we light this place up, every hostile force within 100 clicks is going to converge on our position. We'll have maybe 20 minutes from first contact to wheels up, and that's being optimistic." "Then we need to move fast," Thea said. "Hit them hard, locate my father, and get out before reinforcements arrive." "Assuming he's actually there," Santos pointed out, "we're taking a lot of risk based on intelligence that came from an unknown source." "I know," Thea met his gaze steadily, "but it's the only lead we have. And if there's even a chance Colonel Blackwood is in that facility, we have to take it." Kowalski cleared his throat. "There's another issue we need to address. General Hawthorne. If he's really behind the Kandahar Protocol, he's got resources we can't match. Long-range communications, satellite surveillance, the ability to scramble fighter jets. The moment we hit that compound, he's going to know. And he's going to do everything in his power to make sure we don't make it back. Which is why we're not telling anyone what we're doing," Kane said. "No official channels, no requests for air support, no coordination with command. As far as anyone knows, we're running a routine patrol that got lost in the mountains. A routine patrol doesn't involve a Black Hawk and enough weapons to start a small war," O'Brien said dryly. "Then we'll have to be creative about how we requisition equipment." Kane's expression suggested he already had plans in motion, plans that would end careers if discovered. Devin Cross spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but precise. "There's one more variable we need to account for: communications. A facility like this will have multiple redundant systems: satellite uplink, encrypted radio, probably a hardline connection to regional command. If we go in loud, they'll call for backup within seconds. We need those systems neutralized before the first shot is fired." "Can you do that?" Thea asked. Cross smiled, a slight expression that didn't reach his eyes. Give me 30 minutes with their communications infrastructure, and I can make sure nobody knows we were ever there until it's too late. But I'll need physical access to their equipment, which means someone needs to get inside before the assault begins, Coleman said thoughtfully. He turned to Kane. Do we have any assets on the ground? Anyone who could provide internal support? Kane shook his head. Not that I... He stopped mid-sentence, his expression changing. Wait, Cortez mentioned something when I talked to her about the coordinates. She said she'd been monitoring the facility through unconventional channels. Maybe she has a contact. Then we need to talk to her, Thea said. Now. They worked through the night, refining the operation down to its essential components. Richardson would pilot them in just after sunset the following day, using darkness and terrain masking to avoid radar detection. The team would fast rope into the compound, neutralize guards with suppressed weapons to maintain tactical surprise as long as possible, then breach the detention building and locate Colonel Blackwood. Total time on ground, 15 minutes maximum. It was an ambitious timeline, possibly suicidal, but it was also their only option. At 0400 hours, with the plan taking shape but critical questions still unanswered, Thea stepped outside the warehouse for air. The Afghan night was cool, desert stars blazing overhead with crystalline clarity. She stood in the darkness, trying to steady her breathing, trying not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Can't sleep either? She turned to find Coleman approaching, moving with the careful gait of someone whose joints had been damaged by too many parachute jumps and too many hard landings. Too much to think about, Thea admitted. Your father used to say the same thing before an operation. He'd pace for hours, running through scenarios, looking for the flaw in the plan that would get people killed. Coleman pulled out a cigarette, lit it with practiced ease. Mind if I smoke? It's your funeral. We all die of something. He took a long drag, exhaled smoke into the darkness. You know what Garrett's real talent was? It wasn't shooting, though God knows he was good at that. It was seeing patterns, connecting dots that nobody else noticed. He could look at a situation and instantly understand all the moving pieces, all the hidden agendas. Sounds like it didn't help him much in the end. On the contrary, it kept him alive for 18 years while operating alone in the most dangerous parts of the world. That takes more than skill, Lieutenant. It takes genius. Coleman studied her through the smoke. You've got the same gift. I saw it in how you planned tonight's operation. You see 3 moves ahead, anticipate reactions, account for chaos. That's not training, that's genetics. Thea said nothing, uncomfortable with the comparison. She'd spent years trying to understand her father, to connect with a man who existed only in photographs and other people's memories. Now she was being told she was like him, and she wasn't sure how to feel about that. He talked about you, you know, Coleman continued softly. Not often, because it hurt too much, but sometimes, late at night when the mission was done, and we were drinking terrible whiskey in some safe house, he'd tell me stories. About teaching you to shoot when you were 8 years old. About how you'd correct his form, little slip of a thing telling a Delta Force colonel he was holding the rifle wrong. He was so proud of you. He left me. The words came out harsher than Thea intended. Whatever his reasons, whatever noble cause he was fighting for, he made a choice to disappear, to let me grow up thinking he was dead. He made a choice to keep you safe, Coleman said firmly. The people behind the Kandahar Protocol don't have limits, Lieutenant. They kill families. They destroy anyone who threatens their operation. If they'd known Garrett was alive, they would have used you and your mother as leverage. He couldn't risk that. So instead, he risked himself for 18 years. Yes, because that's what fathers do. They sacrifice themselves so their children can have better lives. Coleman dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot. Tomorrow you're going to see him again, and it's going to be hard because he's not going to be the man you remember. Prison changes people, especially the kind of prison where they don't bother with legal niceties. But underneath whatever they've done to him, he's still your father. Still the man who taught you everything you know. Remember that when things get difficult. Thea swallowed past the tightness in her throat. What if we're wrong? What if he's not there? Then we find another lead and keep looking. But I don't think we're wrong. Someone sent you that photograph for a reason. Someone wants this story to come out. Coleman's voice dropped. The question is, why now, after all this time? What's changed? It was a good question, one that had been nagging at Thea since she'd received the mysterious package. Wars didn't stay secret by accident. They stayed secret because powerful people worked hard to keep them that way. Something had shifted in the balance, some factor she couldn't see yet. She was still thinking about it when Kane emerged from the warehouse. We've got a problem. Thea's pulse spiked. What kind of problem? The kind where Major Cortez just showed up asking questions about why I've been requisitioning equipment off the books and assembling a team in an unauthorized location. Kane's expression was grim. She's waiting inside, says she needs to talk to you directly. This was it, the moment when their operation either fell apart or expanded in unexpected ways. Thea followed Kane back into the warehouse, where Major Elena Cortez stood with her arms crossed, surveying the assembled equipment and personnel with sharp intelligence. Cortez was 43, career military intelligence, with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. She'd survived 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan by being smarter than everyone else in the room and never, ever trusting official narratives. Her dark eyes fixed on Thea with laser focus. Lieutenant Blackwood, Cortez said, her voice carrying parade ground authority, care to explain why you're planning what appears to be an unsanctioned military operation using assets you have no authorization to use? The warehouse went silent. Every man's hand drifted slightly closer to a weapon, preparing for the possibility that this conversation would end with Cortez calling security. Thea made a calculation. Trust was a weapon that could cut both ways, but sometimes it was the only weapon available. Major, she said carefully, how much do you know about the Kandahar Protocol? Cortez's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I know it's a conspiracy theory that's been floating around intelligence circles for years. Allegations about corruption in the Afghan war effort, nothing substantiated. What if I told you it was real? What if I could prove that senior military officers have been deliberately prolonging this war for profit and that they've been killing anyone who threatened to expose them? I'd say you're describing high treason, and I'd ask what evidence you have to support such an accusation. Thea pulled out her laptop, opened the files Coleman had provided. Bank records showing transfers from shell companies to numbered accounts held by currently serving officers. Weapons shipment manifests that don't match official records. After-action reports that have been altered to hide evidence of American forces being deliberately compromised. And a pattern of deaths, soldiers, contractors, journalists, all of whom were investigating irregularities in Afghan operations. She turned the laptop so Cortez could see. The major leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents with the speed of someone trained to absorb information rapidly. Minutes passed. The only sound was the hum of the laptop fan and the distant roar of jets taking off from the main runway. Finally, Cortez straightened. Her face had gone pale. Jesus Christ, this goes all the way to General Hawthorne, Thea finished. Among others, we believe he's one of the architects of the Kandahar Protocol, and we believe he's currently holding my father prisoner at a black site in Paktika province. Your father, Colonel Garrett Blackwood, supposedly KIA in 2001. He faked his death to investigate the conspiracy. He's been operating undercover for 18 years. 3 days ago, I received intelligence suggesting he's been captured and is being held at coordinates that Hawthorne's office tried very hard to make me forget about. Cortez processed this, her analytical mind clearly working through implications and consequences. You're planning a rescue operation, off the books with no official sanction, targeting a facility that's probably under Hawthorne's direct control. Yes, ma'am. That's insane. Even if you succeed, Hawthorne will have you all arrested the moment you return to base. Court-martialed at minimum, probably worse. Only if he can prove we did anything illegal, Kane interjected. And that becomes difficult if the evidence of the Kandahar Protocol goes public at the same time we extract Colonel Blackwood. Cortez looked at him sharply. You're talking about releasing classified information. That's not just career-ending, Captain. That's prison time. Only if they can prove where it came from, Coleman said, speaking for the first time. And only if they want to draw attention to what the documents contain. Sometimes the best defense is mutually assured destruction. Who the hell are you? Frank Coleman. I've been helping Lieutenant Blackwood investigate her father's disappearance. And before you ask, yes, I'm the one who provided most of the evidence you just looked at. Evidence I obtained through methods that would definitely get me arrested if anyone cared to look too closely. Cortez turned back to Thea. Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need an honest answer. Is this about rescuing your father, or is this about revenge? Thea met her gaze without flinching. It's about both, and it's about making sure thousands of American soldiers didn't die so that corrupt officers could get rich. My father spent 18 years trying to expose this conspiracy. The least I can do is finish what he started. By starting a firefight at a black site and potentially triggering an international incident. By rescuing an innocent man and revealing the truth about this war. The warehouse was absolutely silent. Cortez stood motionless, weighing options, calculating risks. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a USB drive. 6 months ago, she said slowly, I started noticing anomalies in intelligence reports coming out of Paktika province. Nothing dramatic, just small inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. I dug deeper, quietly, through channels I trusted, and I found evidence that someone was running unsanctioned operations in that region. Operations that weren't appearing in any official database. She held up the USB drive. This contains everything I've gathered. Satellite imagery of the black site you're planning to hit. Guard rotations. Communications intercepts. And most importantly, confirmation that the facility is holding at least one American prisoner who matches your father's description. Thea felt her heart hammer against her ribs. You knew. I suspected, but I had no proof, no authority to investigate further, and every time I asked questions, I got shut down by people much higher up the chain of command than me. So I waited. And now you've given me exactly what I needed. A reason to act, and a team crazy enough to do it. You're helping us? Kane asked, suspicion clear in his voice. I'm giving you intelligence that will improve your chances of survival. What you do with it is your decision. Officially, I don't know anything about this operation. Unofficially, Cortez's expression hardened. I've been watching good soldiers die in this war for 20 years. If even a fraction of what you've shown me is true, then we owe it to every fallen American to burn this conspiracy to the ground. She handed the USB drive to Thea. The guard rotation changes at 2100 hours. That's when you'll have the best chance of getting in undetected. After that, you've got approximately 17 minutes before the shift change is discovered and reinforcements are called. Use that window wisely. Why 17 minutes? Santos asked. Because that's how long it takes for the communications officer to complete his hourly check-in with regional command. If he misses that check-in, alarm bells start ringing immediately. Richardson whistled softly. 17 minutes to infiltrate, locate a prisoner, and extract. That's tight. It's impossible, O'Brien said flatly. We'd need at least 30 minutes just to clear the facility and reach the detention block. Then you'll have to move faster, Cortez said, or you'll need a distraction that prevents them from calling for help until you're already gone. Thea's mind raced through scenarios. A distraction. Something that would occupy the guards' attention, prevent them from sounding the alarm immediately, buy them precious extra minutes. Communications, she said suddenly. If we take out their communications capability first, they can't call for help even if they realize they're under attack. Easier said than done, Kowalski pointed out. Most black sites have redundant systems. Satellite uplink, radio, hardline. You'd need to hit all three simultaneously. Or you'd need someone on the inside to do it for you, Coleman said thoughtfully. He turned to Cortez. Major, do you have any contacts at that facility? Anyone who might be sympathetic to what we're trying to do? Cortez hesitated. There's a contractor who does maintenance on the communications equipment, former Army Signals Intelligence. I worked with him in Iraq. He's not a fan of how things are being run out there. Can you reach him? Possibly, but asking him to sabotage a secure facility is asking him to commit treason. We're all committing treason, Kane said grimly. Might as well have company. Cortez pulled out her phone, typed a message, sent it. Seconds ticked past, then her phone buzzed with a response. She read it, her expression unreadable. He says the next scheduled maintenance window is tomorrow at 20:30 hours. He can trigger a cascade failure in the communications systems that will take approximately 25 minutes to repair. But only if someone can guarantee he won't be left behind when this all goes to hell. We'll get him out, Thea promised. Anyone who helps us gets extracted. Non-negotiable. Cortez nodded slowly. Then I'll confirm with him. But Lieutenant, understand what you're starting here. This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. This is an act of rebellion against the chain of command. Once you cross that line, there's no coming back. I crossed that line the moment I learned the truth about my father, Thea said. Everything after that is just following through. The plan evolved rapidly with Cortez's intelligence. The maintenance contractor, whose name was Thomas Reed, would create a communications blackout starting at 20:30 hours. Richardson would insert the team at 20:35, using the confusion of the system failure as cover. Cross would immediately move to the communications building to ensure the blackout held, while the assault team breached the detention facility. They'd have approximately 25 minutes before communications were restored and the alarm could be raised to regional command. 25 minutes to rescue a man who might not even be there. 25 minutes to expose a conspiracy that had been running for 2 decades. 25 minutes to either change everything or die trying. As dawn broke over Bagram, Thea stood on the tarmac watching the sunrise paint the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. In 18 hours, she would be flying into those mountains, into a battle that would determine not just her father's fate, but the truth of a war that had consumed her entire adult life. Kane appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, which she accepted gratefully. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, Thea admitted, but also clear. For the first time in weeks, I know exactly what I need to do. Your father would understand that feeling. He spent his whole life moving toward danger instead of away from it. Called it moral gravity, the idea that some things are so wrong you can't help but fight against them, even when fighting means sacrificing everything. They stood in companionable silence, drinking bad coffee and watching the sun climb higher. Around them, the base was waking up, pilots running pre-flight checks, mechanics servicing helicopters, soldiers heading to the mess hall for breakfast. The routine machinery of war, grinding forward with mechanical indifference. Thea, Kane said, using her first name for the first time, I want you to know something. When I met your father in Syria, he told me that the hardest part of his war wasn't the combat or the loneliness. It was knowing that every day he stayed in the shadows was another day stolen from the people he loved. But he also said that some truths are worth any price, even the price of everything you hold dear. Do you believe that? Thea asked. I didn't used to, but after seeing what you've shown me, after understanding what we've been fighting for all these years, Kane's voice hardened. Yeah, I believe it now. And I believe that tomorrow we're going to bring your father home. And then we're going to make sure his sacrifice meant something. What if it goes wrong? Then we make sure the evidence gets out anyway. Cortez has copies. Coleman has copies. And I've arranged for everything to be sent to 3 different journalists if we don't check in within 72 hours. Kane's smile was grim. Hawthorne thinks he's got us trapped, but the truth is, he's the one in the kill box. He just doesn't know it yet. Thea felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she'd been carrying since the photograph arrived. Whatever happened in the mountains tomorrow night, her father's war would end. One way or another, the truth would come out. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me, for risking everything. Thank your father. He's the one who taught me that some things are worth the risk." Kane drained his coffee, crushed the cup. "Now let's go make sure we're ready. We've got one shot at this, and I'll be damned if we waste it." They walked back toward the warehouse together, 2 soldiers preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of more than just one man. Behind them, the sun continued its inexorable climb, marking time with mechanical precision, counting down the hours until everything changed. 18 hours until insertion. 18 hours until Thea Blackwood would either save her father or die trying. And in the grand scope of a war that had consumed 20 years and countless lives, those 18 hours felt both infinitely long and desperately short. But they were enough. They had to be. Because sometimes all you needed was one perfect shot. The Black Hawk flew low through the mountain passes, skimming ridgelines with barely 50 feet of clearance, the rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust that glowed amber in the setting sun. Thea sat in the cargo bay, surrounded by 6 other operators who'd chosen to risk everything for a man most of them had never met. The helicopter's engines thrummed through her bones, a rhythm that matched her accelerating heartbeat. Richardson's voice crackled through her headset. 15 minutes to target. Weather's holding. No radar contacts. We're good. Thea checked her equipment for the 10th time in as many minutes. M4 carbine with suppressor, spare magazines, flashbang grenades, zip ties, medical kit. Everything in its place, every movement automatic from years of training. But her hands were shaking slightly, and she knew it had nothing to do with fear of combat. Coleman noticed. He leaned close, speaking directly into her ear to be heard over the rotor noise. "Your father used to shake before operations too. Called it the electricity. Said it meant you were alive, present, ready. Don't fight it." She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Colonel Garrett Blackwood waited. 18 years of separation, 18 years of believing him dead, all coming to an end in the next 30 minutes. If he was even there, if he was still alive, if this wasn't an elaborate trap designed to eliminate everyone who knew too much about the Kandahar Protocol. Kane caught her eye from across the cargo bay. He tapped his chest twice, then pointed at her, the old Delta Force signal for, "I've got your back." O'Brien and Kowalski repeated the gesture. Santos gave her a thumbs up. Cross, hunched over his electronic equipment, looked up long enough to nod once, sharply. These men, who'd known her for less than 48 hours, were trusting her with their lives. She wouldn't let them down. 5 minutes, Richardson announced. Going dark. The cabin lights extinguished, plunging them into red-lit dimness. Thea pulled down her night vision goggles, and the world transformed into shades of green. The mountains below looked like the surface of an alien planet, all sharp edges and deep shadows. The helicopter banked hard left, following a river canyon that would mask their approach. Thea's stomach lurched, but she focused on her breathing, on the mission parameters they'd rehearsed a dozen times. Get in, locate the prisoner, extract. 25 minutes from boots on ground to wheels up. Simple. Impossible. Necessary. 2 minutes, stand by. Reed confirms he's in position. The team rose as one, checking each other's equipment with swift efficiency. Thea slung her rifle, gripped the fast rope with gloved hands, positioned herself at the door. Cold mountain air rushed into the cabin, carrying the smell of dust and distant snow. Below them, the black site materialized out of the darkness. 3 buildings arranged in a triangle, exactly as the satellite images had shown. Guard towers at each corner, razor wire gleaming dully in the starlight. Lights blazed in the windows, and Thea could see figures moving inside the barracks building. 20 men, Cortez had said, armed, trained, loyal to whoever paid them. This wouldn't be a surgical extraction. This would be war. 1 minute, Reed is executing. Communications blackout in 3, 2, 1. Mark, you've got your window. Through her night vision, Thea saw lights flicker in the communications building. Guards emerged from doorways, confused, reaching for radios that no longer worked. The compound descended into controlled chaos as men tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Perfect. The helicopter flared, rotors screaming as Richardson brought them to a hover directly over the detention building. 50 feet below, the roof waited. Go, go, go! Thea dropped through the door, hands sliding down the fast rope with controlled speed. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she hit the roof in a combat crouch, rifle already coming up to scan for threats. Kane landed beside her, then Coleman, then the others in rapid succession. Cross immediately split off toward the communications building, moving with surprising speed for someone carrying 40 pounds of electronic equipment. Richardson pulled away, the Black Hawk disappearing into the night like a ghost. The sudden silence was deafening. Thea hand-signaled the team into position. O'Brien moved to the roof access door, pulling out his breaching tools. Kowalski covered him, scanning the compound through his rifle scope. Santos prepared his medical kit, ready for casualties that were inevitable. The door opened with a metallic screech that seemed impossibly loud. Thea winced, but no alarm sounded. No guards came running. Reed's communications blackout was holding. They descended into darkness, night vision turning the stairwell into a tunnel of green shadows. The detention building smelled of concrete and disinfectant, and something else, something that made Thea's skin crawl. The smell of human suffering, old and pervasive. The stairs ended at a corridor lined with heavy steel doors. Each door had a small observation window and a number stenciled in white paint. 8 doors, 8 cells. Behind one of them possibly was her father. Kane positioned himself at the corridor entrance, covering their 6. O'Brien and Kowalski began checking cells methodically, peering through observation windows, moving with swift silence. Cell 1, empty, O'Brien whispered. Cell 2, empty. Cell 3, single occupant, male, appears unconscious. Thea's pulse spiked. She moved to cell 3, looked through the window. The man inside was curled on a concrete slab, his back to the door. He wore prison orange, and even in the distorted green of night vision, Thea could see he was emaciated, his spine visible through the thin fabric. But his hair was wrong, dark where her father's had been gray, and when he shifted slightly, she saw he was too young, maybe 40. Not him. Cell 4, empty. Cell 5, empty. The corridor felt endless, each empty cell another hammer blow against hope. What if the intelligence was wrong? What if Cortez's source had been fed false information? What if her father had been here but was moved, or worse? Cell 6, Kowalski said, his voice suddenly tight. Single occupant, male, approximately 65, matches description. Thea was at the door before she consciously decided to move. She pressed her face to the observation window, hands trembling so badly she could barely focus. The cell was bare except for a metal cot and a bucket. Sitting on the cot, staring at the wall with the 1,000-yard stare of a man whose mind had traveled to distant places to escape present horror, was Colonel Garrett Blackwood. He looked nothing like the man in Thea's childhood memories. That man had been strong, vital, filled with barely contained energy. This man was a ghost, hollowed out by captivity and interrogation. His hair was white, his face gaunt, his body bent. But Thea recognized his hands, The same hands that had taught her to hold a rifle, to sight a target, to breathe between heartbeats. And on his left forearm, barely visible beneath the grime, was the tattoo she remembered from childhood. A small compass rose with the words, "True North," beneath it. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely audible even to herself. O'Brien was already working on the door lock with practiced efficiency. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. Garrett Blackwood didn't move, didn't acknowledge the intrusion. He continued staring at the wall, unresponsive, lost in whatever mental fortress he'd constructed to survive. Thea stepped into the cell, lowered her night vision goggles, activated a small flashlight. The beam illuminated her father's face, and she saw scars there that hadn't existed 18 years ago. Burn marks, the evidence of systematic torture, and something else, a network of fine lines around his eyes that spoke of constant vigilance, even in captivity. "Colonel Blackwood," she said quietly, professionally, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Sir, we're here to extract you. My name is Lieutenant Thea Blackwood. I'm—" His head turned with mechanical slowness. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that no longer quite believed in the possibility of rescue. For a long moment, he simply stared, processing her presence, trying to determine if this was real or another hallucination designed to break him. Then his gaze focused on her face, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes widened fractionally, and something broke behind them. Some dam that had been holding back 18 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope. "Thea?" His voice was a rasp, unused for so long it barely functioned. "Little bird? Is that really you?" The childhood nickname shattered her professional composure. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Yes, sir, it's me, and we're getting you out of here." "You shouldn't be here," Garrett said, his voice gaining strength even as his body trembled. "Too dangerous. They'll kill you. They'll kill everyone you—" He stopped, his eyes going to Coleman, who'd appeared in the doorway. "Frank? Jesus Christ, Frank, you're alive?" "Hard to kill, Garrett. You should know that by now." Coleman stepped forward, gripped Garrett's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Can you walk?" "I can run if I have to." Garrett stood, swaying slightly but steady enough. He was shorter than Thea remembered, diminished by captivity, but his eyes had regained their focus, that laser-sharp intelligence that had made him legendary. "How many hostiles?" 20 on site, Kane reported from the corridor. "But our communications blackout won't last forever. We need to move." They formed up around Garrett, Santos doing a quick medical assessment as they moved. Dehydrated, malnourished, evidence of historical trauma, but ambulatory. Blood pressure's low, but stable. "He'll make it." "Damn right I'll make it," Garrett muttered, accepting a weapon from Kowalski, a Glock 19, standard issue. He checked the chamber with movements that were still automatic despite months of captivity. "Who's in command of this circus?" "Your daughter," Coleman said with a slight smile. Garrett looked at Thea, and she saw something flicker across his face. Pride, certainly, but also grief, and a kind of wonder. "You made Lieutenant, JSOC, from the gear, Marines?" "Yes, sir." "Good. The Marines know how to shoot." He glanced at Kane. "And you brought a SEAL, scraping the bottom of the barrel, aren't we?" Kane actually laughed, a quick bark of surprised amusement. "Good to see you too, Colonel. Now, can we save the reunion for when we're not in a hostile facility?" They climbed back up the stairwell, emerging onto the roof into a night that had grown darker. Storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, lightning flickering in the distance. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of approaching rain and something else, smoke. Thea keyed her radio. "Cross, status?" "Communications are down and staying down," Cross's voice came back, slightly breathless. "But we've got a problem. Reed says there's a secondary system he didn't know about, some kind of emergency beacon. It activated automatically when the main systems failed. Signal went out approximately 3 minutes ago. Meaning what? Meaning reinforcements know something's wrong. They're probably already inbound. Kane swore softly. How long until they arrive? Reed estimates 15 to 20 minutes, maybe less if they scramble birds from Jalalabad. 15 minutes. Their timeline had just been cut in half. Shepard 2, this is Shepard 1, Kane said into his radio. We need immediate extraction. Package is secure, but timeline is compressed. Richardson's response was immediate. Negative, Shepard 1. I've got multiple radar contacts inbound from the northeast. Looks like a patrol that got curious about our flight path. I'm going to have to stay low and dark for another 10 minutes, or they'll paint me. 10 minutes before extraction was even possible, and 15 before enemy reinforcements arrived. They were out of time. Kowalski, Thea said, making the decision instantly. Can you slow down those reinforcements? The demolitions expert smiled grimly. I've got enough C4 left to make their approach very uncomfortable. Give me 2 minutes to set charges on the access road. You've got one. O'Brien, Santos, get Colonel Blackwood to the extraction point north side of the compound. Coleman, you're with them. Kane and I will provide cover. Negative, Garrett said firmly. I can still shoot. Give me a position and I'll hold it. Dad, you've been in captivity for 18 months, he interrupted. Not 18 years. They caught me in Pakistan a year and a half ago. Before that, I was operational. I'm rusty, but I'm not helpless. And I'll be damned if I'm going to hide while my daughter fights my war. Thea looked at him, saw the steel in his eyes, the absolute refusal to be protected like some fragile thing that might break. She understood then that this was about more than just combat capability. This was about dignity, about reclaiming the identity that had been stripped from him cell by cell, day by day. Fine, she said, but you stay with Kane. He's your spotter. You don't move without his clearance. Deal. They split up, Kowalski racing toward the south perimeter with his demolitions kit, the others moving to establish defensive positions. Thea and Kane took up positions on the roof of the detention building, rifles trained on the compound entrance. Garrett positioned himself between them, the Glock held with steady hands that belied 18 months of captivity. Below them, guards were emerging from the barracks, no longer confused but actively searching for the source of the communications failure. They moved in pairs, professional and cautious, weapons at the ready. These weren't inexperienced militia fighters. These were contractors, probably former military, who'd done this kind of work before. Kowalski? Status, Kane said into his radio. Charges set, detonating in 3, 2, 1. The explosion lit up the southern approach like a miniature sun. The shockwave rolled across the compound, shattering windows, triggering car alarms. A fireball climbed into the sky, and Thea could see a section of the access road collapse, creating a choke point that would slow any approaching vehicles. Every guard in the compound was now looking south toward the explosion, which meant nobody was looking up. That would change in approximately 5 seconds. Contact, Garrett said calmly, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man who'd spent decades in combat. Guard tower, northwest corner, he's seen us. Thea swung her rifle, acquired the target. The guard was raising his radio, opening his mouth to shout a warning. She fired. The suppressed rifle coughed, and the guard dropped. But the element of surprise was gone. Other guards had seen their comrade fall, were now scanning the rooftops, raising weapons. Light them up, Kane said. Thea settled into her rhythm, the same rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times. Breathe. Acquire. Fire. Chamber. Move to next target. Beside her, Kane was doing the same, each shot precise and lethal. And between them, Garrett Blackwood worked his pistol with shocking efficiency, engaging targets at ranges that should have been impossible for a handgun. In 30 seconds, they'd eliminated 8 hostiles, but the survivors had found cover, were returning fire, and the distinctive crack of AK-47s filled the night air. Bullets sparked off the roof, whined past Thea's head. She felt the heat of a near miss, but her training held. Keep shooting, keep moving, suppress the enemy. "Shepard 2, we are heavily engaged," Kane reported. "Where's my extraction?" 30 seconds out, get to the courtyard, north side. I'm coming in hot. Thea and Kane abandoned their position, but Garrett was slower, his movements stiff from months of confinement. Thea grabbed his arm, pulled him toward the fire escape. "I can move on my own," he protested. "Then prove it," she shot back, already descending the metal stairs 3 at a time. They reached the courtyard just as the Black Hawk materialized from the darkness, rotors screaming, Richardson flying with reckless precision that bordered on insanity. The helicopter settled into a hover, and ropes dropped from both sides. O'Brien was already climbing, Santos right behind him with a limping Reed, the contractor who'd sabotaged the communications. Coleman and Cross were next, moving with the coordination of professionals. "Go!" Kane shouted at Thea over the rotor wash and gunfire. "Get your father on that bird." But Thea had seen what Kane hadn't. A guard emerging from the administration building, holding not a rifle, but an RPG, the distinctive shape unmistakable even in darkness. Time slowed to a crawl. The guard was raising the weapon, sighting on the helicopter. If that RPG hit, everyone aboard would die. Richardson, Santos, O'Brien, Coleman, Cross, Reed. All of them gone in an instant. Thea made a choice. She let go of her father, brought her rifle up, and fired in one fluid motion. The guard dropped, but the RPG was already launching, streaking toward the Black Hawk with a trail of fire. "Break left!" Thea screamed into her radio. Richardson reacted instantly, throwing the helicopter into a violent banking turn. The RPG shot past the tail rotor, missing by inches, and detonated against the mountain behind them. The shockwave buffeted the Black Hawk, but Richardson held it steady, kept flying. But while Thea had been focused on the RPG, she hadn't been watching her six, didn't see the guard who'd flanked their position, who now stood 10 feet away with an AK-47 pointed directly at her. The world narrowed to the barrel of that rifle, to the finger tightening on the trigger, to the absolute certainty that this was how it ended. Then Garrett Blackwood stepped between Thea and the gun. The AK fired. Garrett jerked backward, hit the ground. Thea screamed, a sound of pure rage and grief, and put 3 rounds through the guard's chest before he could fire again. She dropped beside her father, hands already moving to find the wound. Blood, so much blood, soaking through his prison uniform. Entry wound high on the left chest, dangerously close to his heart. "Dad, stay with me," she said, her voice breaking. "Santos, medic!" But Santos was already in the helicopter, 30 feet above them. And the Black Hawk couldn't land, not with guards pouring from every building, not with the LZ compromised. "Thea," Garrett said, his voice surprisingly calm, "listen to me. Don't talk. Save your strength. Listen." He grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "In my cell, loose brick, bottom left corner, everything I found, about the protocol, about Hawthorne. Get it. Finish this. I'm not leaving you. You have to." Blood bubbled at his lips. "I've been dead for 18 years. Let me stay dead, but make it mean something. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to leave me again." Kane appeared beside them, firing controlled bursts to keep the guards at bay. "Blackwood, we need to move now, or we all die here." Thea looked at her father's face, saw the peace there, the acceptance. He'd made his choice, just like he'd made his choice 18 years ago, sacrificing everything for a war that nobody else could see. But this time, she could save him. "Kane," she said, her voice like steel, "get everyone else clear. Tell Richardson to come back for us in 60 seconds. "Thea, that's an order, Captain. Go." Kane looked at her, saw something in her expression that made him nod once. sharply. He sprinted for the helicopter, grabbed the rope, climbed with desperate speed. The Black Hawk pulled away, disappearing into the night, and Thea was alone with her father in a hostile compound with 20 armed guards closing in. "What are you doing?" Garrett asked. "Saving you, like you saved me." She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "I didn't come 18,000 miles to watch you die. Not again." "You can't. Watch me," she keyed her radio. "Cross, are you still monitoring their communications?" Cross's voice came back immediately. "Affirmative, what do you need?" "I need you to send a message to General Hawthorne. Tell him that Lieutenant Thea Blackwood has his prisoner. Tell him I'll trade Colonel Blackwood for safe passage to the Pakistani border. He's got 60 seconds to respond before I execute his prisoner and upload everything my father found to every news organization in the world." "Thea, that's insane," Kane said over the radio. "He'll never agree." "He'll agree, because the Kandahar Protocol only works if it stays secret. And if I die here, the evidence goes public automatically. He's got no choice." 30 seconds of silence. Then Cross's voice, barely believing. "He's responding. He agrees to the trade, but he wants proof of life first." Thea held her radio to her father's mouth. "Colonel Blackwood, speak." Garrett coughed, blood speckling his lips, but his voice was clear. "Hawthorne, you son of a bitch. You should have killed me when you had the chance." Another pause. Then, "He's sending a medical team. They'll stabilize Blackwood, then escort you both to the border. But Thea, he's also mobilizing assets to intercept you before you reach Pakistan. This is a trap." "I know," Thea said calmly. "Kane, you reading this?" "Yeah, and I've got an idea. How do you feel about Pakistan's inter-services intelligence?" "I feel like they'd be very interested to know that an American general has been running illegal operations in their country without permission." "Exactly what I was thinking. Stand by." Thea waited, maintaining pressure on her father's wound, watching as guards surrounded their position but didn't fire. They wanted Garrett alive. That gave her leverage. 2 minutes later, a medical team approached cautiously, hands raised. They wore contractor uniforms, not military, which meant they were deniable. Thea kept her rifle trained on them, but allowed them to work. They packed the wound with combat gauze, started an IV, stabilized Garrett with practiced efficiency. "He needs surgery," one of them said. "Soon, but he'll survive transport." "Then let's move," Thea said. They loaded Garrett onto a stretcher, formed up around Thea, and began moving toward a waiting vehicle. The guards watched, but didn't interfere. Orders from above. The drive to the border took 40 minutes, the longest 40 minutes of Thea's life. She sat beside her father, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall with each labored breath. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. "I'm sorry," he whispered during one lucid moment, "for leaving you, for missing everything." "Save it," Thea said, her voice thick. "You can apologize properly when you're recovered. You owe me 18 years of birthday dinners, and I'm collecting every single one." He smiled, a ghost of his old expression. "Deal." 5 kilometers from the border, Kane's voice crackled on Thea's radio. "You've got company. 2 Blackhawks, military markings, heading your way fast. Hawthorne's making his move." "How long?" 3 minutes, maybe less. The vehicles were pushing 80 miles per hour on a road that barely qualified as dirt track. Not fast enough. "We're not going to make it," the driver said, fear clear in his voice. Then Thea saw them. 3 Pakistani military helicopters rising from the other side of the border, rotors churning the night air. And beneath them, Pakistani troops establishing a checkpoint directly on the border. "What the hell?" the driver breathed. Kane's voice came through, triumphant. "Turns out Pakistan's ISI is very unauthorized American operations in their territory. I may have shared some of Colonel Blackwood's intelligence with one of their liaison officers. They're treating this as a sovereignty issue." The American helicopters broke off, unable to cross into Pakistani airspace without triggering an international incident. Thia's vehicle crossed the border, stopped at the checkpoint. A Pakistani officer approached, his expression professionally neutral. "Lieutenant Blackwood? Major Cortez sends her regards. She has arranged medical transport to Islamabad. Your father will receive treatment at a facility that has been made available to us for situations like this." "Situations like this?" Thea asked. "Situations where American soldiers need to disappear before their own military can silence them." The officer smiled slightly. "Pakistan has long experience with such things. Your father will be safe. You have my word." The medics transferred Garrett to a Pakistani military ambulance. Thea climbed in beside him, refusing to let him out of her sight. As the ambulance pulled away, heading toward Islamabad in safety, Garrett squeezed her hand weakly. "You did it," he whispered. "You finished what I started." "We're not finished yet," Thea said. "We still have to burn it all down. Hawthorne, the protocol, all of it." "We will." His eyes drifted closed. "But first, I'm going to sleep. Wake me when the war's over." "Dad," but he was already unconscious, his breathing steady, his pulse strong. The medics nodded reassuringly. He would live. Thea leaned back against the ambulance wall, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming relief. They'd done it. Against every odd, they'd actually done it. Her radio crackled. Coleman's voice came through, rough with emotion. "Thea, did he make it?" "He's alive. He's going to make it." A cheer went up over the radio. Kane, Santos, O'Brien, Kowalski, Richardson, Cross, all celebrating. They'd pulled off the impossible. But Thea knew the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 months later, Thea stood on the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., watching as her father walked toward a podium surrounded by cameras and microphones. He looked different than he had in that Pakistani ambulance. Healthier, stronger, dressed in a suit instead of prison orange. The bullet wound had healed, leaving only a scar, but his eyes still held the shadows of what he'd endured. Beside Thea stood Kane, Coleman, and the rest of the team. They'd all been cleared of charges after the evidence of the Kandahar Protocol had gone public. Documents leaked to every major news organization simultaneously, impossible to suppress or deny. The resulting scandal had consumed Washington for weeks. Generals had resigned. CIA officers had been arrested. Senate hearings were ongoing, and General William Hawthorne was awaiting trial for treason, conspiracy, and murder. Pakistan had played its cards perfectly, releasing Colonel Blackwood's testimony through diplomatic channels, positioning themselves as defenders of international law. The United States couldn't dispute the evidence without admitting to illegal operations in Pakistani territory. Hawthorne had been trapped by the very system he'd corrupted. Garrett stepped to the microphone. For a moment, he simply looked out at the assembled crowd. Journalists, politicians, soldiers, and citizens who'd come to hear a dead man speak. "My name is Colonel Garrett Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying across the plaza. "For 18 years I've been dead, and for 18 years I've been fighting a war that most Americans didn't know existed. A war against corruption within our own military and intelligence establishment. A war I couldn't fight publicly because the enemy had too much power, too many resources. So I fought in the shadows, gathering evidence, building a case, hoping that someday the truth would matter more than money or politics." He paused, looked directly at the cameras. "That day is today. Because of my daughter, Lieutenant Thea Blackwood, and the team of extraordinary soldiers who risked everything to expose this conspiracy, the Kandahar Protocol is finished. The men who prolonged a war for profit, who sent thousands of Americans to die so they could get rich, will face justice." The crowd erupted in applause, but Garrett raised a hand for silence. "But I'm not here to be celebrated. I'm here to honor the soldiers who died fighting a war that was never meant to be won. I'm here to demand accountability from the leaders who betrayed their oaths. And I'm here to tell my daughter publicly what I should have told her 18 years ago. He looked directly at Thea, and she felt the weight of his gaze, the love and regret, and desperate hope for forgiveness. Thea, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry for the childhood I stole from you. I'm sorry for every birthday, every graduation, every moment I missed. I told myself I was protecting you, and maybe I was. But I was also running from the guilt of knowing that if I came home, I'd be putting you in danger. So I stayed away. And that was cowardice dressed up as heroism. His voice cracked slightly, and Thea felt tears streaming down her face, not bothering to hide them. But I want you to know, Garrett continued, that you are the finest soldier I've ever known. Not because of how you shoot, though God knows you're better than I ever was. Not because of your tactical brilliance or your courage under fire, but because when faced with an impossible choice between following orders and doing what was right, between saving yourself and saving others, you chose right. Every single time. You are everything I hoped you'd be, and more than I deserved. Thea climbed the steps, walked to her father, and embraced him while cameras flashed and the crowd cheered. He held her tight, this man who'd been a ghost for so long, and whispered in her ear words meant only for her. I love you, little bird. I never stopped, not for a single moment. I know, Dad, she whispered back. I know. Later, after the speeches and interviews and debriefings, after the politicians had made their promises and the cameras had stopped rolling, Thea and Garrett sat together on a bench overlooking the Potomac River. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. What happens now? Thea asked. Now I testify, write a book, make sure the truth actually matters. Garrett looked at her. And I spend time with my daughter, get to know her again, if she'll let me. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching boats drift on the river. Then Garrett said, in that compound, when you let go of the helicopter to save me, that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the craziest. Learn from the best, Thea said with a small smile. Touché. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I realized during those months in that cell? The only thing that kept me going wasn't the mission or the evidence or even the hope of justice. It was imagining what you'd become, who you were out there in the world, living the life I couldn't. And when I saw you in that doorway, I realized that my imagination had fallen short. The real you was so much more than I dared to hope. Dad, let me finish. All those years I told myself I was fighting for something bigger than myself. For truth, for justice, for the thousands of soldiers who deserve better. And that was true. But the real truth, the one I couldn't admit, was that I was also running. From the fear of being a father, of failing you the way my father failed me. So I became a ghost, and I told myself it was noble. He turned to face her fully. But you, Thea, you didn't run. When you found out the truth, you didn't hide behind noble excuses. You assembled a team, planned an impossible mission, and you came for me. Not because it was your duty or because it served some greater good, but because I was your father, and that mattered. You reminded me what I'd forgotten, that love isn't weakness. It's the only thing worth fighting for. Thea felt her throat tighten. I didn't do it alone. No, you did something even more important. You built a team. Kane, Coleman, Santos, all of them. You made them believe in something. That's leadership, Thea. Real leadership. The kind that I spent my whole career chasing and never quite achieved. That's not true. It is. I was a good operator, maybe even a great one, but I was always alone, always isolated. You brought people together, made them stronger than they were individually. That's a gift I never had. They sat together as darkness fell. Father and daughter reunited after 18 years of separation. Around them, the city lights began to glow, monuments illuminated against the night sky. You know what I want? Garrett said finally. What? I want to teach you to shoot. Really shoot. the way my father taught me and his father taught him. I want to pass down everything I know, not as a soldier to a soldier, but as a father to a daughter. Before it's too late, before I forget. You're 65, not 90, Thea said. You've got plenty of time. Maybe, but I've learned not to take time for granted. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on, let's go home. Your mother's been waiting 18 years for this reunion. I don't think she'll forgive me if I make her wait any longer. Thea took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They walked together through the gathering darkness. Two soldiers returning from a war that had consumed too many years, cost too many lives, but had finally ended. Behind them, the Potomac River flowed on, indifferent to human concerns, carrying secrets and sorrows out to the sea. And above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over Afghanistan's mountains and Montana's forests, and every battlefield in between. The same stars that would still be there tomorrow when the real work of rebuilding began. But tonight, Thea Blackwood had her father back, and that was enough. That was everything.